first to admit that as a gamer, I have not been a strong supporter of video game based movies. In fact, anyone who knows me personally knows my disdain for all the live action Resident Evil movies.
I'm surprised my eyes haven't rolled completely in the back of my head every time a video game based movie has been announced or adapted. Uwe Boll has contributed his share of bottom of the bargain bin movie adaptations of semi-popular games. Since the release of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, video game adaptations have suffered one embarrassing blow after another by critics, devoted fans, and especially the often inexperienced and incompetent screenwriters that adapt them. When trying to legitimize games as art, I wonder if it's really necessary to use the mainstream film industry when games simply aren't the same form of entertainment. I think the mixed results and bad reception of video game movies speak volumes. Is it the fault of game publishers that have sold the movie rights willingly to just any production company eager to adapt a video game into a movie? Is it the fault of the directors and the writers that have little to no grasp of the material they are producing into a movie? On the flip side, could it be the overeager directors and producers that want to cram every reference of the game for the sake of including them irrespective of whether it's good for the movie? Well, it's hard to say when a lot of things go into film production, which I will not get into for the purposes of this video. Instead, I think it's more important to dissect why most video game movie adaptations turn out so poorly, and what possible future adaptations of movies based on games need to watch out for in the future. Max Payne is the perfect example that illustrates almost every stumble and trap that falls into video game movie adaptations. The thing that boggles my mind to this day, however, is how a story-driven game like Max Payne could get such a sloppy adaptation as a film. I have never seen a film that wanted to distance itself so much from its source material, but at the same time try to force source material in really awkward and convoluted ways. It's one of the main problems that make the Resident Evil movies almost equally terrible films. The high-profile and ambitious Tomb Raider and Prince of Persia films, however, did not have the problems that Max Payne had. While not terrible movies, they were incredibly bland and forgettable. I can only blame the inexperienced screenwriters. Don't believe me? The information is out there and readily available online. I think the screenwriter's body of work, or lack of, speaks for itself.
The thing that I think that most gamers should realize, as painful as it is for me to say, is that more often than not, games are the worst source of material for movies.
While there are some strong exceptions like Metal Gear Solid and Uncharted 2, I focus this criticism primarily on the fact that it's mainly the gameplay that offers the majority of the entertainment value gamers get. Video game narrative in many games have mostly been in service to the gameplay, which can sometimes cause an overlooked disconnect from the actions of the player in relation to the game's narrative. And gameplay is primarily focused on giving players objectives and incentives to either play better or see the outcomes of their actions. Story is just not the most important aspect of why gamers play games. Stories in most games mainly offer an external incentive to play a game. I don't doubt that gamers will disagree with me on this point when they make the case why all narrative-driven games deserve movies.
Ironically, a lot of narrative-driven games that try to emulate film run into the same problems that play bad or mediocre movies.
Predictable or weak plots, logical missteps in narrative, poorly developed characters, flimsy or unnecessary dialogue, cliché action sequences, one-dimensional characters, drawn-out scenes, the list goes on. And when story from a game has one or more of the problems I mentioned, it's going to bleed out any earnest attempt at adapting a good or watchable movie. Games aren't designed with the same mentality that goes into crafting a film. A game's narrative has to be consistent with the gameplay, so it doesn't have to be constrained by the limitations of a given film. Although I will admit that the glaring problems of a film-inspired narrative in many games persist, they don't really detract from the overall experience of playing the game. Games are free to tell a story however they want, regardless of how they choose to present the material.
Now, it doesn't mean that all game stories are bad for film adaptations.
They just have extended narratives built around objective-based gameplay that don't translate well when compacted into a 90-minute script that has to rely strictly on character interaction to hold the audience's interest. But it's not a completely grim picture for video game movies. Wreck-It Ralph was virtually a love letter to classic arcade games despite being a lighthearted, fairly predictable kids movie. The two CG animated Resident Evil movies and Final Fantasy VII Advent Children have also offered the best alternative for any gamer clamoring for a video game movie that doesn't make them facepalm. They aren't perfect cinematic experiences, but they do exactly what they need to do, They focus the narrative on the characters while retaining consistency with the lore and stories built from the games in which they are adapted. With the recent announcements of an animated Ratchet & Clank movie and a possible Heavenly Sword movie, there is hope that more films inspired by games will finally have the high quality and ambition normally reserved for comic book movies. Well, for the most part.
If you like what you see, like, comment, share, or subscribe. And thanks for watching.